All right, well, if you were with us last January, we started off the year spending a few weeks focusing on the topic of worship. And I really thought it was a great way to get the year started in the right direction, so I thought we would do something similar this year. The question that I asked you earlier, what is most important in your life? What do you value most? What were some of your answers? I heard one answer. I didn't hear any others, but family, I heard that about 20,000 times. Anything else? That's about it. You know, we value a lot of different things, and just thinking through a guy's mind, I'm not going to speak for the women, but, friends is obviously on their family, the outdoors. I'd say TV and movies are in there somewhere. You know, those are important to some guys. Football is probably in there. Did you see that game last night? Oh, the Bengals just gave it away, didn't they? Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. Cars, trucks, right? Jobs, home. How about toys? Any guys in here like toys? Big toys, right? Not the little toys, you know. We've got our own version of toys. And how can we tell what we value? Well, it's pretty easy, isn't it? We look at our time. We look at our money, our energy. That's what shows us what we value, right? I mean, talk is pretty cheap. So just so you're sure, let's kind of double think through this. What we're after this morning is not a list of things that we value, but what we value most. What is the most important thing in our life? And really, I asked you to put aside God, so that would be an easy answer for hopefully most of us here this morning. But what of all these things that we've mentioned that we value highest of all? You still sticking with family? Health? Someone said health. That's good. Now this might be a person, place, thing, maybe a pleasure, a dream, a status maybe. There's lots of options. And this person, thing, experience, whatever matters most to you, we can recognize it, again, by what we put first in our lives. I mean, we can talk is pretty cheap, but actions, where it's at. What is it that you value most based on your life's work? And you can throw God back into the mix. We probably ought to have him in there somewhere, right? If someone was watching your life, what would they say you value most? Now, if you remember from last year, whatever we value most, based on our life, based on our actions, that's what we worship, isn't it? What is worship? I mean, it's not just singing songs, is it? Even though that might be part of it. We're trying to express our hearts. But worship is much bigger than that, isn't it? Worship is not a noun, it's not a thing, it's not a person. Worship is actually a verb, it's an action, isn't it? Worship is simply about value. You like the blinking light on the stage? That's probably going to drive me crazy, but hopefully it doesn't drive you crazy, because I'm not even sure we know how to turn it off. Anyway, distractions. Worship tells us what we value most. It determines all the other actions of our life. It's our driving force. It's the thing that organizes us. It's the thing that prioritizes how we live the rest of our life. That action that we have towards the thing that we value most. And I would even go so far, and we mentioned in the video, and we talked about it last year, is that we are all worshipers. We can't really get away from it. We all focus on something as most important. And I think when we get a little confused when we limit worship to religion. Because really everybody on the planet is proclaiming with every breath, every step of their lives what they worship, what they value most. We can't help but worship. We're hardwired, designed to worship. We're designed to value things, to respond to what we value, to worship, to center our lives around something, right? So we have something in our life that we value most, and then we have this response to it that we call worship, centering our lives around that one thing. And it's really pretty simple to see what we value most in our life. You follow your trail, right? Your time, money, energy, loyalty. And when you get to the end of that trail, what do you find? You find a throne, don't you? A throne. It organizes us. It's the king of our life. It determines our actions. Whatever's sitting on that throne, whatever we value most. Now, obviously, hopefully this is obvious at least, we're designed to put God on that throne, aren't we? I think we'd all probably say that in this room. Maybe not. In fact, the Bible tells us that we were made for God. Colossians 1:16 says, "For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him." No, we are created by him. That's a kind of a given. But we're also created for him. And as a result, we kind of have this internal homing device that's built as part of our soul, and we're actively trying to, we just automatically long for God. We automatically long. He's pulling us to him. We are designed to worship him. It's where we feel most complete. But what happens when we put something else on the throne? Well, the Bible calls that idolatry. Now hold it, you want to talk about making golden statues and bowing down to them? Do people still do that? Yes, I know this whole subject of idols, it just seems kind of obsolete, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, the Ten Commandments mentions, don't have any other God before our God. But that seems like what they needed to talk about then, and this is now. And yes, the Bible talks about idolatry, but these commands, haven't they expired? We don't really kneel before golden statues anymore, do we? Do you know anyone that does that? So is this even a relevant conversation? Idolatry just seems primitive. And yet idolatry is the most discussed problem in the Bible. It's mentioned over 1,000 times, and that should probably give us some caution, maybe some pause at least, to wonder about this idolatry. Idolatry comes in every single book of the Bible. So maybe it isn't so irrelevant. And maybe it's not about statues. Idolatry, when you really think about it, it's about the throne of your heart and who or what is on it. Isn't it? Just the basics of it. So as we focus on worship to begin the year, as we spend some time the next few weeks looking at this, I'd like to take kind of a new look at idolatry, to really dive into this and think about this. I think it will become clear that there's actually a war going on. It's a war for our hearts. These gods, they clash for the throne of our hearts. And really, if that's what's at stake, our hearts, this is a big deal. So everything about me, everything that I do, every relationship I have, everything I hope or dream or wish to become, it depends upon who wins that war. Who actually gets to sit on the throne of my heart? It's a big deal. So let's just kind of begin this discussion by getting some bearing on idolatry in terms that maybe we can wrap our heads around. Let me just kind of give you an example from someone who's not us. Let's throw someone else under the bus so we can kind of speak freely. Does that work for you? I mean, why not throw someone else under the bus rather than us? I always like that option. In fact, you probably know the story well. You know the character well. Turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 11. We're going to look at King David for just a few moments, and he's obviously an important figure in Scripture, and I want to point out that this is not the end of his story. It's not a real fair way to treat David, to just give a snapshot of his life, this particular moment of his life. So we are throwing him under the bus, so just kind of keep that in mind. So as we're diving into this passage this morning, would you just kind of think about what you see as most important to David, okay? So beginning with 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So we see at the beginning of this story that King David is not doing what other kings did back then. He didn't go off the war. He decided to stay home in Jerusalem. Verse 2, one evening David got up from his bed, walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof he saw a woman bathing. What does that mean? She's naked. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. So you'll notice that David does not say, oh wow, there's a lady over there and she's bathing, she's naked. I just need to kind of get off this roof. He doesn't do it, does he? He hangs out there. In fact, he wants to know more information about this girl. And just a word of advice, that's probably not good advice for a good thing for a married man to do, especially since she's married as well. So really, in fact, I'll include not just married men, but anyway, you get the point. Continuing on in the story, the man said, she's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Again, not the best choice, right? Do we know what God thinks about this, what David's doing? We do, don't we? What does he call that? Adultery. That's what it is. And do you think David knows that? Yeah, pretty sure. He knows what he's getting into. And let's just kind of continue the story. And the story actually gets worse. You guys know the story. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. So what is David to do? What is David to do? How about cover it up, right? How about we just cover up this whole deal and maybe no one will find out? Now, if David would have covered up his eyes at the beginning, we wouldn't be having this problem, right? Wrong kind of cover up, David. But he's obviously not listening to me. And he's not listening to God, right? Pretty clear. Verse 6, so David sent this word to Joab, who was on the battlefield. Send me Uriah the Hittite. Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Right? He's after something. He wants something to happen with his wife. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. So what's David trying to do? Still the cover-up, still trying to figure out how to get this done without anyone finding out. So what does he do? He tries to get Uriah to go be with his wife so that, later on the husband doesn't suspect, well, how in the world did you get pregnant in the first place? Right? That's what this is about. Great plan, right? Verse 9, but Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and didn't go home. David was told Uriah did not go home, so he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Uriah said to David, well, the ark, the Israel, Judah, they're all staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men, they're camped out in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? There's some good advice for David there. As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. What does this tell us about Uriah? He's a good guy, isn't he? Great guy, great husband, high character. Verse 12, then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. Is this a good plan, really? Get the guy drunk, maybe you can convince him. Is this a God-honoring plan? But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servant, he did not go home. Didn't work again. Apparently, he picked the wrong guy, right? King David picked the wrong guy. But on to plan C, right? He's not done. He's still going to try to cover this thing up. Verse 14. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him, so he will be struck down and die. What's David doing? He's trying to get Uriah murdered. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Skip ahead to verse 26. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. As well she should have. I mean, what a great guy. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done, as if this needed to be said, displeased the Lord. Now this story is pretty black and white. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Pretty simple. David blows it big time. Now, what are the things that we see in this story that we would maybe consider sin? I mean, probably the two that I'd point out the most is adultery and murder, right? There's some other things in there, but two big ones there. Now, if these are his problems, why would I bring adultery into this story? Ever think about that? In fact, I would say that adultery is the very foundation of David's problems. Examine this with me. If we can even skip the adultery part for now. We can skip that part. Let's just start with the cover-up. What is the core of what he's after with the cover-up? It really isn't Bathsheba, is it? At least not to begin with. What is he trying to do? He's trying to save his good name, isn't he? It's all about his image, about how other people see him. That's what he's trying to cover up. If we could just smooth this over, then people won't find out that I'm a creep. Right? So let's just imagine that in this story, that the issue is idolatry. What God is David putting on the throne? His image, his self. He's trying to serve himself, how other people see him. That seems to be what's sitting on the throne, right? And what was David willing to do to protect his image? Just about anything, right? We didn't find anything that he wouldn't do to protect his image, right? Do you see that? I mean, look at it. Look at this. He manipulated a great guy in Uriah. He lied to probably one of his friends, his general, Joab, included him in the thing. And how did he treat Bathsheba? Just a pawn, piece of meat, right? That's all she was in this story. And we aren't even to the murder yet. And what did David do to God? Do you think God had an opinion about this whole story? Do you think David knew what God wanted in this? If he did, he didn't care. So I think it's pretty obvious that God couldn't be on that throne. And man, he was just so focused, wasn't he? He was so twisted. This thing that was on the throne of his life, it was so controlling. Now, if David would be taken to a modern-day therapist, I mean, what would they mostly focus on? You ever think about that? They wouldn't be focusing on idolatry. They'd be looking at other things. They'd be looking at maybe the sexual issues in his life. I mean, he had so many wives, and yet he's still out there messing around, right? How about murder? Murder would be a good thing to probably do some do some therapy on. How about you not murder again? How did he treat people? Pretty horrible. That'd be another area maybe to explore, maybe to work on in his life. But really, I think his real problem, the real foundation to everything going wrong in David's life was this one. Who or what did he have on the throne? And if he would have just solved that issue, the other things wouldn't even become an issue. I mean, what was driving him? What was controlling him to make these decisions? Now imagine that there's this man and he's been coughing constantly. Good timing on the cough, by the way. And I can actually relate to this because I've been coughing for the last month. And this man, he's just so distracted by this cough. It keeps him up at night. It interrupts conversations that he's trying to have. The cough is just so unrelenting. So he decides to go to the doctor, and he decides to see if the doctor could figure out why he's coughing. Well, the doctor runs some tests, and he discovers that this man has lung cancer. Now imagine that the doctor knows how tough this news will be for this man, that he's not going to handle it real well. So he decides to not tell his patient about the cancer. Instead, he gives him a prescription for some pretty strong cough medicine and tells him that he should start feeling better pretty soon. Well, the man's delighted. He was glad it wasn't something more serious. And sure enough, taking the cough medicine, he actually starts feeling better. The cough syrup, it seems to have solved his problem. Meanwhile, very quietly, this cancer is eating away at his body. The cancer is the real problem. What was the cough? It's just a symptom. Just a symptom. There are people going to church around the world and they're coughing. They're struggling, they're hurting, they're stressing, they're cheating, they're lusting, they're spending, they're worrying, they're quitting, they're medicating, avoiding, searching. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we are doing as we're along. And you know, it's interesting. When they come to me, a lot of times, and maybe it's not to me, maybe it's to their close friends, but they're sharing their struggles. They're unloading their frustrations. They're talking about their disappointments, and they're confessing their sins. And they seem to point to what they believe is the central problem in their life. In their minds, they've nailed it. They can't stop coughing. But what I think needs to be discovered here is they're just talking about a symptom. They're not talking about the true illness, the true issue, which almost always is idolatry. Who is on the throne? What is going on? And it's not even something that we talk about. Contemporary author Os Guinness, he points it out that idolatry is the most discussed problem in the Bible and one of the most powerful spiritual and intellectual concepts in the believer's arsenal. And yet for Christians today, it is one of the least meaningful notions. It is surrounded with ironies. Perhaps this is why many evangelicals are ignorant of the idols in their lives. They're trying to get rid of the symptoms in their life when really the core issue is not being taken care of. What if the gods of here and now are not some cosmic deity with weird names, right? What if they just look so ordinary in our lives? What if they're not gold statues that would be obvious to us? Maybe they're simple things. Maybe we don't even choose to make them gods at all. It just kind of happens, almost passively. Oftentimes we don't choose them. They're pretty sneaky, actually. They're good at kind of just getting into our life somehow. And, you know, in looking at David's life, it's pretty easy to pick out things because they're bad. But what if some of the idols that we serve are good things that are maybe out of control or maybe controlling us? And they're really, again, they're so hard to detect in our lives because we're not physically kneeling to them, are we? We do the majority of our kneeling through our checkbook, through our calendar, maybe through our search engine on the computers, maybe through our imaginations. What if I told you that almost every sin that you're struggling with, no matter what discouragement you might be facing in your life, maybe the lack of purpose in your life, all comes back to these gods because of idolatry? So the next few weeks, we're going to be taking a hard look at some of the major gods in our culture, the ones that we don't talk about much. And we're going to try to make sure that the God that's on that throne is the God that should be on that throne in our lives. Is that fair enough? The God of the universe, the creator of the universe. He's the one that we need to have there, and we need to double check. We need to be a little tenacious about this. We've got to make sure that we are serving the right God in our life. I want to close our time this morning with a look at Joshua. In Joshua 24, he's near the end of his life. He's gone through quite the journey with the Israelites. Some ups, but mostly downs. And now, at this point in his life, he's the elder statesman, and he's sharing with his people. He's giving them a challenge. You see this in verse 14 of Joshua 24. He says, "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Probably heard that verse before. Now you'll notice in this passage that Joshua presents them with four different options, four different gods that they can serve. They can serve the gods of their ancestors beyond the Euphrates River around Abraham's time. Obviously, you got in there the gods of Egypt that they would have been familiar with. And then you have the gods of the Amorites, which they're facing right now. And of course, there's the Lord God, right? So he's telling them, check the box, which one are you going to serve? And you got lots of options. Now, one of the things I want to point out to you out of this passage is that Joshua does not give them a none of the above choice. He doesn't give them an opportunity to say, or choose not to serve any God. You don't see that in the verse. Why? Because we are all worshipers. We can't help but worship. If we're not going to choose that God, we're going to choose this one. Maybe not by choice, but that's what we do. We're worshipers. Peter Kreeft, a philosopher, puts it this way. I think this is really good. The opposite of theism is not atheism. It's idolatry. The opposite of theism is not atheism, it's idolatry. I mean, isn't that interesting? If you think about this, if you can walk away from God and say you don't believe in him and think that you're off the hook from worshiping any God, but you're really just walking into another God. A God who is at war for your heart. So I'm going to challenge you in the coming weeks to identify the gods that you're more prone to, maybe. The one that's warring for your heart. And as we discover those false gods at work in our hearts, I'm going to encourage you to make a worship choice. Okay? Joshua says, choose for yourselves. Choose for yourselves. And you know this verb tense that Joshua uses for choose? It isn't a choose once in a lifetime. This is really a I chose, I choose, I will be choosing, I am choosing. I mean, there's a never-ending choice. We go through life moment by moment choosing who we're going to serve. What God is in our life that we're going to serve. So as we look at Joshua 24, and I would encourage you to look at this. It's kind of pretty interesting. We see that choosing to Joshua means three different things. First of all, that we remember and appreciate what God has done for us, the true God. If you read verses 2 to 13 of Joshua 24, you'll see that Joshua is kind of recounting all the incredible things that God has done for them. What an incredible God that He's been for us. And that's what we're trying to do when we gather for worship, isn't it? We're trying to reflect on our week and remember all that God has done for us and really worship Him in that way. Remember and celebrate God working in our lives. And that's the first step of choosing your God. The second one is recognizing who our God is and what He's like. In verse 19 of Joshua 24, Joshua reminds the people that God is holy and He is jealous. And that's important for us to remember. He's not going to share our hearts with another God. He is a holy God. He is set apart from any other God. He is a jealous God. He knows better than anyone who we are created to serve. And it's Him. Third, choosing your God. It means that we smash all the other gods. Verse 23, now then, Joshua says, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. Yield your hearts to the Lord, but don't forget to smash all the other gods. Right? So as we're preparing for the coming weeks, as we're preparing our hearts for this, I just encourage you to be praying and thinking and evaluating your life a little bit, thinking about who might be invading on that throne. Is there something that I've been kind of falling for that maybe I need to get rid of? If I've been using cough syrup to treat the sin problem in my life, maybe it's time that I choose this day who my God will be. Who will sit on my throne in my heart? Would you pray with me? Lord God, we are so thankful to be in this place, to have the freedom to talk openly about you, to look into your word, to allow the word to evaluate and press in on our lives. Just pray, Lord, that you would be speaking to us through your Spirit, that you'd be challenging us. Would you just help us to see through the sneakiness of some of the gods that we have in our culture? Help us to see clearly who it is that we are serving, and help us to make sure that it's you. If there's things in our lives, Lord, that are creeping in on us, that we're allowing too much control to, Lord, would you help us to deal with those problems and choose today who we're going to worship. Have your way with us, Lord. We want to worship you.